everybody. Happy Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whenever. It's Thursday when I record this, but it'll be the weekend when you view it. We are actually starting a new unit here. We're going to talk about ecology for the last couple weeks of school. Normally, this is a pretty fun unit, but unfortunately, some of the fun things we normally get to do, we're not going to be able to do. So, part of your assignment actually is to, on your own, go outside and look at things in your yard, look at living things. I mean, don't, break social distancing and all that, but just look at stuff. I mean, that's what ecology is how does biology actually work in the real world? Different species interacting with each other. That's ecology. Okay? So normally it's pretty fun. Yeah, let's get started. So, we need to talk about really what this actually is. What kinds of things get counted as ecology. Okay? So in biology, we have levels of organization. We've talked some about these. Okay? As it says here, I mean, we start out, we talked a little bit about chemistry right at the very beginning, about atoms making up molecules. Okay? Those are different levels, the atom level, the molecular level. Okay, but molecules combine together to make up to make organelles technically, and then organelles combine to make cells. Okay, cells are used to make tissues. Tissues make up organs. Organs make organ systems. Right. The esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine. Those are all part of the digestive system. Okay, and you combine a digestive system, a cardiovascular system, a nervous system, a muscular system, all these different organ systems together. You combine them together, you make an organism. Okay, one living thing. Now, we didn't talk a lot about organs, organ systems, even tissues in this class, but if you take anatomy or you take biomed or human body systems, we'll talk a lot more about those levels of organization. Okay, but the thing is, in biology, these levels of organization, that doesn't stop when you get up to the level of one organism. Okay, we have larger levels, things that are bigger than just a single organism. Okay? Now, because we live in northern Indiana, we're going to use Lake Michigan as kind of an example of all these levels that we're going to see here. And if you've ever done any fishing, you may know this is a perch, yellow perch, a very commonly seen, caught, even eaten fish in northern Indiana, and really all across much of North America. Okay? So, the level of the organism, one yellow perch. That's not all we've got. The next higher level of organization is the population. Okay, a population is many separate individual organisms. Okay, and we should be relatively familiar with what a population is, having just finished our evolution unit. But here's a definition for you, just in case. A population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same area that interact and interbreed with each other. Okay, so we could say that a population, an example of a population, would be all the yellow perch that live in Lake Michigan. There's millions of them, at least. Okay. Now, Lake Michigan is really big. Okay. So a perch that lives in the southernmost part of Lake Michigan probably doesn't directly interact with a perch that lives way up in like the Wisconsin part of Lake Michigan. But, I mean, if it really wanted to, it could swim there. Okay. And perch that live in Indiana, in Lake Michigan, they swim around. They swim miles. They go over into Illinois. They go over into Michigan. Maybe they go to Wisconsin. So they do interact with each other. All the perch in the lake are capable, at least, of interacting and interbreeding with each other. So we call it all one population. Okay. Now, next higher level is the community. A community is all the populations. Okay. So not just the perch, but the bass, the salmon, the trout, the cattail. It's not just fish, it's the bacteria, the birds, okay? All the living things, the plants, everything living in Lake Michigan, all the populations of all living things in one particular habitat we call that a community. Now, this image shows some of the species of fish that are found in Lake Michigan. So this is some of the population, but strictly speaking, or excuse me, some of the community. Strictly speaking, community, quote unquote, refers to all living things, all the populations, not just the fish. Okay? Next higher level then, so we've got individual organism, we've got population, all the organisms of one species, community, all the populations of all the species. Next higher level then is ecosystem. You may have heard this term. Ecosystem refers to all the living and non-living things in a particular area and the interactions between them. Okay? So it's all the living things, it's the whole community. But then, for the ecosystem, we also consider the non-living things that are important for the living things. Like, what's the climate? Okay? What kind of temperatures does Lake Michigan experience? How much sunlight does it get? What sorts of things are in the water? The water itself, how deep is the water? Okay, that's all part of the ecosystem. All right. What this map, this image shows, the green area on here, it's called the watershed of Lake Michigan. Okay, so this is the land area where all the streams and rivers from that are in the green area eventually flow to Lake Michigan. So theoretically, any rain or snow that falls in the green area will eventually get into a river that flows into Lake Michigan. If you're outside the green area, say you're over in this area, that's not part of the Lake Michigan watershed anymore. That's presumably part of the Lake Huron watershed. Watersheds are important because the water in them is all connected. So if we're talking about the Lake Michigan ecosystem, it's helpful to consider the whole watershed, not just the lake itself, but the rivers and streams and lakes that it's connected to. Because anything that affects the water, say here in central Michigan, that water is eventually going to get into Lake Michigan and affect the water there. Say we have some pollution, okay, some kind of chemical spill here in central Michigan, that will eventually get into Lake Michigan because it's part of the same watershed. It's all part of the same ecosystem. Okay. Now, pollution is a non-living thing, so we consider that part of the ecosystem. Okay. Now, there is a level higher still, and that's biome. Okay. A biome is really, really big. It's a huge community or a huge ecosystem that covers a very large area. It's determined by the climate and specifically by the plants that we find in that biome. Okay, so as an example, Lake Michigan, it's freshwater, obviously, and it's in the temperate sort of climate, meaning there's warm summers and cold winters. So there's this whole biome referred to as the temperate freshwater biome. Okay, and lakes that are part of the temperate freshwater biome all over the world are pretty similar. Okay, Lake Michigan is pretty similar to the other Great Lakes. Okay, but it's also pretty similar to temperate freshwater lakes that you'd find in Europe or you'd find in Russia or even that you might find in Australia, New Zealand, Argentina. Okay, the exact species that live in each of these lakes are probably different, right? I mean, you won't find the same species, yellow perch, in South America, okay, unless they've been introduced or something there, because that's a North American species. But if you looked at a lake, a freshwater lake in Argentina that experiences similar temperatures and similar rainfall patterns to what Lake Michigan has. You looked at the fish in there, you'd probably find some fish that are pretty similar to yellow perch, that have similar behaviors because it's a very similar ecosystem. Okay? We call that a biome. Now, it turns out there are actually not very many different biomes, if we're being kind of generous in our definition of biome. This graph shows, what is this, about 10 or so biomes. Now, these are terrestrial biomes. They're land biomes. Okay, there would be a separate
graph to show the aquatic biomes. But these are some just really basic types of biomes, some ecosystems that we find all over the world. And if you look at the axes of this graph, on the y-axis, we have annual precipitation in temperature, in centimeters, how much rain or snow, how much liquid precipitation that ecosystem gets over the course of a year. That's on the y-axis. And on the x-axis, we have the average temperature. Over the course of a year, what's the average temperature there? Okay. And what this graph shows is that actually what biome you have in a particular place is determined just by those two factors. Okay? If there were a new place on Earth that you'd never been to, okay, and you only knew what's the average temperature of that place, year-round average temperature, and how much precipitation in an average year does that place get. If you only knew those two things, you could look at this graph and get a pretty good guess of what biome you would find there. Okay? Would it be a rainforest or a desert? Okay? Would it be a grassland or a forest? Just by knowing the temperature and the precipitation, you can do that. Okay? So, as an example, northern Indiana has an average annual temperature of a little over 10 degrees Celsius. 10 degrees Celsius is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly. So if you went out and took the temperature every hour of every day and night, 365 days out of the year, full year, took the average temperature for the whole year, in northern Indiana, that average is about 10 or 11 degrees Celsius. Maybe a little bit more, but right around there, okay? And we get here, on average, a little over 100 centimeters, about 110 or 120 centimeters of precipitation. Okay, that's rain, and that's snow if you melted it into liquid. How much total liquid precipitation do we get? About 110 or 120 centimeters of precipitation. So then, if you look at this graph, about 11 degrees Celsius and about 120 centimeters of precipitation, we're right here in what's called the temperate deciduous forest. And in fact, if you go to a natural area, if you go to Potato Creek, if you go to the Indiana Dunes, some place that has not been, chopped down and plowed up and used for human purposes, that's exactly what you'll find. You find a forest there that is mostly filled with deciduous trees, trees that lose their leaves in the winter. Right here. Okay. If you go a little ways west of here, you go over into like Illinois or so, or even a little bit farther if you go into Iowa, the average temperature is about the same, but the amount of precipitation that they get drops a little bit lower and a little bit lower. And eventually you'll get into the temperate grassland biome. And once again, if you had been here, say 200 years ago, you'd started in Indiana and started walking west till you crossed the Mississippi River and kept going, you would eventually transition from a forest into the prairie, which is a temperate grassland. Okay? Same is true all over the world. You go somewhere that gets a lot of rain and is really warm, that's going to be a rainforest. You go somewhere that's really cold and doesn't get much precipitation, that's a tundra, like northern Alaska or Canada. Okay? Somewhere that's really hot and gets very little rain, that'll be a desert, a hot desert. Okay? So, this is kind of our intro to ecology. So much of what lives in every place is determined by what else is there, most notably the climate, but also the other species present. And those are the kinds of things, the other species issue, that's what we're going to be talking about other days this week. All right? Have a good weekend.